Hi, I'm Dr. Bruce Chalmer. In part one of this video, we talked about plain old sex and what you might need to work on to be able to move on to good sex. So, what makes good sex good and how do you make it happen? Plain old sex becomes good sex when you can be fully present and fully alive. If plain old sex is a physical way of connecting, good sex is a physical way of connecting intimately. And intimacy is the medium of growth. So what I mean by good sex is sex that isn't just about fulfilling a need or even just about pleasure. Good sex helps you become more of who you are. It's about growth. To have good sex, you need to be open to learning, open to guidance, and willing to take risks. You need to develop your capacity for passion, desire, and intimacy, which in turn requires the maturity to be responsible for your own feelings. And to have good sex with a partner, you need to develop radical respect for your partner's ability and need to do the same. Essentially, you can develop the capacity for good sex when you can tolerate anxiety well enough to handle it. What does tolerating anxiety have to do with good sex? Everything. Well, three things anyway. First, for sex to become good sex, you have to let yourself know what you do or don't want and communicate that to your partner, as well as listen to what your partner does or doesn't want. And sometimes that's scary. Can you let yourself know what you like and act on it? Can you handle it when your partner does the same? Can you stay present and open when your partner tells you that they want to do something differently? Or do you feel rejected and hurt? If you can't receive the gift of actual honesty, even when it's not what you wish were true, you can't have good sex. Here's the second way that tolerating anxiety is essential for good sex. For sex to become good, you need to risk expanding your skill set past the limits of the predictable and comfortable. And by definition, that means considering things that might make you anxious, at least at first. This could mean considering techniques or positions that you've been afraid to try. But even more, it means listening to your own and your partner's desires with an open mind. Does the thought of sharing your hidden desire with your partner or hearing about your partner's desire that you didn't know about make you anxious? Probably. And over time, many couples avoid that anxiety and find their sexual repertoire reduces down to a predictable routine. It's comfortable, but it's deadly. To feel alive means to risk new experience, and that means tolerating anxiety. Of course, you shouldn't force yourself to do things you don't want to do or let yourself be coerced into doing things you don't want to do. In fact, that would be the very opposite of listening to your own desires. It would be shutting part of yourself down. Rather, expanding your skill set means opening yourself to learning from your partner, learning from your own experience, both positive and negative, and from reading, conversation, and any and all other sources. To be open to learning means tolerating the anxiety of having your beliefs and even your values challenged, and it means being willing to learn from failure as well as success. You might try something and find you just don't like it. But if you won't try, you won't expand your skills, and that's a recipe for a dying sexual relationship. Conversely, when you risk learning new skills, your sexual relationship is continually renewed. The third way in which you need to tolerate anxiety for good sex involves how you handle the inevitable differences between you. Differences in preference, differences in desire, differences in how you handle the stresses between you, all sorts of differences that exist simply because you're two different people. In particular, how you handle it when one of you wants sex and the other doesn't is a great indicator of whether or not you're capable of good sex. Because no matter how sophisticated your sexual technique, if you can't handle that particular disappointment with grace and generosity, you'll have a hard time with other differences too. Like when one of you tells the other you've always wanted to try role-playing or toys or some particular technique and the other is repulsed by the fantasy. Or when it just doesn't work sometime for one of you. You don't stay aroused or can't seem to get to orgasm or just aren't feeling it. These are situations that can be opportunities for grace and caring or triggers of resentment and recrimination, depending on whether you can tolerate the anxiety of being out of sync with your partner. If the position of his penis or the wetness of her vagina become indices of whether your partner loves you, desires you, or respects you, or even worse, if they become indices of your own desirability in general, then you're enacting a cycle that leads to sexual death. But when you can handle the anxiety, soothe yourself and stay present, those apparent problems are just opportunities for compassion, creativity, and deeper bonding. And that's one of the ironies of good sex. Sometimes the greatest thing for your sex life is when something goes wrong, because problems are what push you to grow. If you can't tolerate the anxiety and stay present when things go wrong, you can't have good sex. Just as therapy can help you get past the triggers, fears, and beliefs that interfere with even plain old sex, therapy, individually or as a couple, can help you learn to handle anxiety so as to make good sex possible. And good sex, as you probably realize, isn't just about sex. To be capable of good sex is also to be capable of intimate connection in other ways as well, even in non-sexual relationships. When couples consult me for therapy, we often find that working on their sexual connection has the effect of improving their ability to connect in other ways, and vice versa. Which brings us to the third part of this video, sacred sex. Plain old sex is a physical way of connecting. Good sex is a physical way of connecting intimately. So, what's sacred sex? Like good sex, sacred sex is a physical expression of intimate connection. But sacred sex, as I am using the term, is more than intimate connection. The word sacred means something set apart from the everyday, something dedicated to a higher purpose. So sacred sex means sex that is elevated, dedicated to something beyond ordinary connection. Sacred sex doesn't just connect you to yourself or your partner, it connects you to the essence of all being. In Western religious terms, sacred sex connects you to God. In Eastern traditions such as Tantra, sacred sex implies ways of releasing spiritual energies that connect you to greater realities. Even in secular terms, sacred sex is an experience of transcendence. You experience the reality that you are part of the whole, a participant in the ongoing creation of all that is. What is it about sex that makes sacred sex more possible than, say, sacred dishwashing or sacred ditch digging? Of course, many traditions would say that both of those are possible too, because pretty much anything we do can be elevated to a higher meaning. But sex is particularly suited to the experience of the sacred precisely because the forces involved in sex, particularly in good sex, are so conducive to taking us out of our own narrow experience. To experience the sacred is to be awestruck, to experience power much greater than ourselves, which can be both thrilling and terrifying. Think back to your first experience of orgasm, assuming you've experienced it. Whether it felt good, bad, or some combination, the sheer power of orgasm is itself awesome. It's the ability of sex to inspire awe that makes sacred sex possible if you can be open to the experience. So, how do you open yourself to the experience of sacred sex? Curiously, it's not about learning techniques for mind-blowing orgasms, though such techniques can certainly enhance good sex. Rather, opening yourself to sacred sex is more about the sacred than about the sex. Developing the capacity for sacred sex involves developing your capacity for experiencing the sacred in all aspects of your life. It's when you learn to recognize sacredness in the everyday that the particular power of sex to evoke sacredness can emerge, and that means cultivating faith. As I've talked about in other videos, faith is when you accept that reality is right. Not merely real, but right, even when it's difficult, even when you can't understand it, even when you know you need to do everything you can to change it. Faith is how you open yourself to experience sacredness, because accepting the rightness of reality transforms terror into awe, anxiety into acceptance, and frozen despair into active determination. When you experience your own existence as part of something much bigger, you can recognize the sacredness all around you. And that's when you can experience the intimacy of good sex as something much more than pleasure and satisfaction. When you are open to sacredness, good sex can be elevated to an experience of cosmic creativity in which your physical and emotional sensations connect you to a deep sense of meaning and fulfillment. The Hasidic rabbi Simcha Bunim of Peshishcha said, "Everyone should carry around 2 slips of paper, each expressing a vital truth. When you're feeling depressed, pull out the slip that says, 'The universe was created for my sake.' When you're feeling arrogant and full of yourself, pull out the slip that says, 'I am but dust and ashes.' Sacred sex invites us to experience those 2 truths simultaneously. We are physical beings, dust and ashes, driven by powerful forces to have sex, and we can do so thoughtlessly or mindfully, cruelly or lovingly, clumsily or skillfully. And we are also capable of self-awareness, which makes us capable of awe at our place in the universe, and can transform sex into an experience of sacredness. Plain old sex, good sex, and sacred sex are all expressions of who we are and who we can become. More than simply a satisfaction of a physical urge, sex can be a source of connection, intimacy, and meaning. It's yours to explore. I'm Dr. Bruce Chalmer. Check out my other videos at brucechalmer.com. and drop me a line. I'd love to hear from you.